Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is a relatively new herbal tea for me. It's from Bigelow Tea, which has a line, I guess, a line of teas called Bigelow Benefits. So it's herbal. It has what's called ginger peach. I think it's calm stomach, something along lines of stomach, which I basically chose today because my stomach has decided to compete with my sinuses, which I'm sure you want to know more about. But yes, it has, of course, ginger and peach, I think, flavoring. I'm not sure how much natural, you know. But it also has peppermint in it, peppermint in it. Say that 10 times fast. And a few other things that are beneficial, I guess, for digestion. So I'm going to try to enjoy it. I think I will because I do like that combination of flavor. And I enjoyed my month of reading. This is my March 2022, reading wrap up. I haven't really talked about any of the books that I read in March, which it's not surprising because I was a bit busy in the month. My sister visited me for a week, and that was wonderful. And of course, before that, because I hadn't had company in a very long time, I needed to do a very big cleanup. And yes, it was quite thorough, although of course I missed a few spots. But but that was quite time consuming, but completely worth it to me. But in the end, I read 6 books. I mean, I should say I completed 6 books, all of which were books I checked out at the library. Which, much as I encourage, my cat's doing something over there. Much as I encourage taking books out of the library always, I'm also kind of like, what about all the books I bought? Why am I not reading them? So I'm trying to maybe do a balance of that in the months to come. Also, the other thing that is that I didn't finish. I know I read from some, but I didn't finish any nonfiction books. So I'm a little off, but I don't hate. I don't hate the selection of books that I read. That's for sure. I read 2 mystery books, 3 middle grade books. So I didn't realize how much I was participating in middle grade March because I did not intend to really. I intended to maybe a little bit, but not that much. And one, I guess, historical fiction book, maybe biographical fiction. It's usually kind of one of the same. And so I'll talk about that one first. It was called The Paris Bookseller. I don't have it with me anymore because I returned it to the library a while back. I wrote down Kerri Maher. And this is fictional account of, I think it was first person. And if it wasn't, it was still in the point of view, it's been a few weeks since I read it, of Sylvia Beach, the founder and owner for some time of, I guess, over 20 years, of Shakespeare and Company, a bookshop in Paris. Not the same Shakespeare and Company that is in current existence, because that one is sort of like the child of the first one. The man, I believe his name is George Whitman, who opened that bookshop, had it under another name, and then I think he got Sylvia Beach's blessing to open it under Shakespeare and Company's name, and he named his daughter Sylvia as well. So it was all kind of a nice thing, but it's not the original, and that's fine because I still want to go there. And I know Marilyn Maya Mendoza has been mentioning that she's planning to go there soon, and I say have all the fun you could possibly have there because that sounds wonderful. And I've been to Paris, but like a day trip that I didn't have enough time to see much of anything. But I've always wanted to go to that particular bookshop. I've been to the 2 that are in existence now, Shakespeare and Company bookshops in New York. They're not related to my knowledge whatsoever, but I do what I can. And but the significance of this original one, first of all, was that it was one of the first, I don't know about the first, but definitely one of the first English language bookshops in Paris. And that was important because there was such a massive population of English speakers, including a lot of Americans, because I guess it was cheaper to live there. And also maybe some people lived certain lifestyles that were not as acceptable in the United States. So altogether, it was a good deal for them in the 20s anyway, and maybe some of the 30s. Yeah, so it starts off, Sylvia Beach, I'm also reading her biography now, so I'll probably learn a little more in depth about her life, but she had spent some of her childhood in Paris, so she and her sister, who was an actress, were spending some time, actually I think it was still during World War One, in Paris, and Sylvia met a bookshop proprietress, proprietor, anyway, named Adrian Monnier, I believe. Adrian and she became very close. And after the war was over, Sylvia, she had gone away into other parts of Europe, returned and decided to open up her own English language bookshop, which, and this is basically the story of that. Mostly about the life of the bookshop, but also of her own life and relationships, and her family, and her different dealings with her family, which were mostly positive, but there were some really sad crises that happened throughout the story. Which, I mean, if you see all the people that were in America, I mean, all the Americans that were in Paris at the time, a lot of people at that time had kind of sad ends. It was a lot of name dropping, but it was good for the story. Ernest Hemingway featured pretty heavily. I think they introduced him a little earlier than he might have been actually in. Little, artist license, as they say. But I thought it was a pretty good story in terms I wanted to know what happened, because I really didn't know much about the life of the bookshop. A little bit of a kind of a weird clash she had with Gertrude Stein. Not an enmity, but like she was sort of written off a little bit by Gertrude Stein because of her support of James Joyce. And a lot of the story has to do with Sylvia's involvement with James Joyce and his publishing of Ulysses, which would not for a long time be published in America because apparently it was seen as indecent. And so Sylvia took it upon herself to publish this book, and it was such a job. I mean, even though I know that was one of her major accomplishments in life, the portrayal of James Joyce made me kind of not want to read any James Joyce. Actually, I famously have DNF'd 2 of his books, and I've been trying to go back to both of them over the years, both Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. For some reason, I just cannot finish his books. I have Ulysses, and I might still have Finnegan's Wake, but I haven't even bothered with both of them, so I don't know if I ever will. But just reading about him, I feel sorry for him in some ways. He had a lot of eye problems, and anyone who has bad eyes in any way can relate to that. Not as bad, maybe, as he did. Some health issues, but it was just his... they made him a little bit impossible to deal with, and I don't know if that was just the book's point of view, but it kind of, I didn't like him. The story was good. I enjoyed it. I think because I do like the whole idea of the 20s in Paris, just the story of the different writers and everything, and artists and other people. But, it stops before World War II, and there were so many important things that happened during that time, and including the drama that happened around the actual bookshop. And I just felt like it cut short. And the author had her notes at the end that were good, that explained a lot of what happened next, but I kind of wanted to see what happened next in the novel. So I would say it was all in all a good read, but I also, maybe wanted something slightly more. But if this subject is appealing to you, I would definitely say it does run very well. It reads very well. So yes. Now, for the 2 mysteries, I'm not putting the hat on today because, in March, it was March Mystery Madness, and there was so much about mysteries that I don't think I need to make a special video about it, especially because I only read 2 mystery novels, and they were both good, though. Both of them are series books and mystery books are usually good in series, so that's okay. One of them is technically also quite historical, and the other one is contemporary. So, the first one I finished was A 3-Book Problem by Vicki Delany. It's another one of the Sherlock Holmes bookshop mysteries. I don't know the number of it by now. Maybe it's book 6 or so. But yeah, they just keep going. But they're good stories. The main, I guess, protagonist, the sort of detective, is Gemma Doyle. She continues to run the bookshop. Apparently, she supposedly runs it with her Uncle Arthur, who is always off on a trip. I'm kind of getting tired of that, to be honest, because you know how many books and sitcoms, especially, have like a mysterious character that never actually appears in the, in the flesh. And like that's a thing, I guess, should I call it a trope? But it annoys me at this point because it was cute at first, but like, I don't need that. Bring him, have him interact. I want to see what he's like. I don't want to hear these hints. He was supposed to show up. So, in this story, the bookshop and the tea shop next door, run by Jane Wilson, of course, are helping to run a weekend in this really, this big house that is very grand, but in the long run, Gemma sees a lot of little flaws because, well, she comes from England where old houses, old stately manors are older and they don't have these little problems. Well, and if they do, they're because they're very old, not because they were very recently. Anyway, I'm going to go into tangents, but and so the man who is behind this weekend seems to be this all around kind of gregarious, outgoing, Sherlockian, well, a person who enjoys Sherlock Holmes very much. And so he also invites other people who are into Sherlock Holmes, including Donald, who is a friend of Gemma's, who, yeah, her fellow, well, she's not really a Sherlockian. She just happens to know a lot about Sherlock Holmes because she runs that business. But he's helpful I think he's helpful in the series just because of his love for Sherlock Holmes. It really pops in a lot. And I love his nerdiness. I just love that kind of fan nerdiness. So, just unabashed, And also the fact that he's not a very well-off guy, so he collects stuff or whatever, but that doesn't really have the money to do much. So kind of it's like a shabby fandom. I love it. But so they go to this place and a lot of people are invited. Some are invited to kind of be staff, and they seem to have previous relationships with this man. And sorry, I had to look up his name. David Masterson. It's been a couple weeks again. I forget names right away. But his wife is not invited, or at least she's not coming. And so there's all these little exchanges between different people. There's one guy who kind of hits on everybody, but that plot seems to leave off a little bit as the time goes on. And of course, this guy Masterson gets killed, and looks like he is killed by a dart, which has some Sherlock Holmes undertones, like the sign of 4. Also kind of reminded me of a Poirot mystery as well, but that isn't brought up at all. And so now it's who would want this person dead, but not just who would want him dead, but who pulled off this murder. And of course, well, thankfully, Gemma's boyfriend, who is also a police detective, he is on hand. So the investigations begin. She sort of puts herself into the investigation herself, which sometimes seems a little bit nosy, but she gets results. So it was a fun story. I've really enjoyed the series for quite some time, but I'm starting to feel a little bit like it's a little bit getting repetitive. Even though it's a different situation, it just feels kind of repetitive. These sort of rich-ish characters that are sort of also maybe having some financial problems. These women who are kind of full of themselves that are kind of wooden as well. I don't know how to explain it, but it's still a good series, and I'll probably read the next one. But I don't feel like I'm feeling that same enthusiasm that I did at the beginning, and I don't know if it's my fault that I'm just maybe getting bored of the series, or maybe it's just not as good. I don't know. So judge for yourself if you've been reading the series, or if you want to start the series, if it gets like that for you. Maybe I'm just having a bit of a slump in that particular series. And I think that's okay, because the next one won't be out for a while, so maybe at that point it will feel fresh to me. We shall see. The other mystery is a number 2 in a series, so I've got quite a ways before I get bored of it. And that is Death of Riley by Rhys Bowen. And this is a group read with a little group that is discussing mystery novels with Kate Howe. And it is a Molly Murphy mystery. She is a very recent immigrant from Ireland in New York City in the turn of the last century, 1901 New York. And still in 1901, so it's been, I guess, it seems around 6 months since the last story. So instead of it being really cold, now it's pretty hot. And Molly is finding herself wanting to do something with her life, as one does. Now that she's in New York for a while and she's gotten used to things to a point, she wants to get a job that she wants. And she has a slight romantic disappointment that at first I thought was a big misunderstanding, but it actually is something I think. I don't want to get into spoilers for the romantic story, but I think it's just something that needs to be ironed out, and I hope they don't over dramatize it as the series goes on. But it's it was interesting because it does move the series forward a little bit. Molly realizes that she wants to be a detective, and so she wants to work for someone who can teach her the ropes because she knows she has a lot to learn. So she tracks down this man called Paddy Riley, who is a detective who doesn't really care for women that much, but she manages to get her way into his agency and work for him a little bit until he turns up dead. And she kind of runs across his assailant and gets assaulted herself, but gets through it, runs into a policeman who is not very nice and doesn't seem to be very helpful. So Molly decides to, take on the role of detective herself, and actually does a pretty good job in my opinion, even though she makes some mistakes. But I think looking into his notes and records and whatever he left behind that the policemen don't confiscate, which is pretty much everything, she gets into a little more of getting to know New York and getting to know the people who might be involved in this murder. And it results in quite a big historical event that, if you know anything about American history, in the late summer of 1901, which I don't know that much, but I kind of had a feeling when certain names started coming up, then yeah, it's kind of interesting how they weave that in. I thought it was a fun story. There were, of course, some things that were a little bit unlikely, how she manages to find herself some friends that were quite, yes, unexpected. She goes to the village and meets people that are involved in things that she knows nothing about, and is much more accepting than I think people of her time would be, but there it is. So, yeah, so it's a little bit like a lot of people that she just happens to run into all of a sudden, and it does help advance the story, but sometimes it's a little bit too helpful. But you know what, that's sometimes you just have to let that go and just enjoy the story, which I did, and I just loved putting myself in that time and seeing what it would be like to be a woman of that time who wants to be a detective, who wants to investigate and show her worth, and yet deal with the restrictions of the time. So I liked it. I really did. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm looking forward to the next one. I hope I continue to have this enthusiasm. So the last 3 books are all middle grade books, and actually 2 of them are classics really now. Well, one of them is a more recent classic, and that is Roald Dahl's Matilda. I've seen the film at least a couple of times. I'm not a huge fan of it. I've also seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Roald Dahl, but I still enjoy the ride. And Matilda is a story about a girl who is extremely smart. I do love the fact that she loves books. This picture kind of shows that, and that makes for a very good beginning to get to know her. Her parents are quite do not understand her, are very neglectful of her. Eventually she goes to school and meets a teacher that she absolutely loves, who sees so much potential in her, but the woman who basically runs the school and is a massively horrible person who is so abusive that I cannot believe any time in history anyone would be able to get away with something like that, even in Dickensian times. So, and I'm reading David Copperfield right now, but it has, you have to sort of stretch your imagination a little bit, because of course, if you've seen the film at all, or if you've read the book, you know that she suddenly develops some powers. So she is like, I don't know, it's almost like Cinderella in a way, in the way she's kind of neglected and then she's kind of saved, except by not a prince. But she's also, it's a little bit like Kerri, you know, from Stephen King, except a lot less terrifyingly frightening. It's just a lot more fun. But it is a universe I probably wouldn't want to be a part of, but it was humorous enough to, you know, let myself escape a little bit. But yeah, I'm glad I read it, because I always wanted to know what the differences were between what happened in the book and the film. There are a few differences, of course. It was well written, but I don't see myself in love with Roald Dahl's storytelling. I don't hate him, but I just don't love him. And then I'm also, well, I had to go back in the series, because I've been reading the Pages and Cope series, and I read I read the fourth book, and this is the third book. So I read the fourth book first, so gave away a lot of spoilers for this one. But this is Pages and Cope, The Map of Stories by Anna James, and Tilly Pages, or Matilda also, it lives at a bookshop with her grandparents and her mother, and she is one of those people who can book wander, which means that she can go into a book and, you know, be a part of the story and then leave the book, but she can also bring characters out of the book. Multiple times in the series she's brought out, especially Anne of Green Gables, which I love. And her friend Oscar also can book wander, but there's a problem. The book wanders are sort of organized by an underlibrary, but the underlibrary has been taken over. This is slightly spoilery if you haven't read the first two books, but by two people who managed to forbid book wandering, and suddenly books are disappearing. Like the whole books are disappearing off the face of this earth, and everyone who's read them doesn't remember the book and doesn't remember how it influenced their life, so it's a problem. So Tilly has found things and been given things that seems to be leading to a sort of like a treasure map, and she believes that it's going to lead her to people called the archivists, who have something to do with book wandering too, and stories, but they're kind of hidden and mysterious. So she and her friend end up going to the United States, to the Library of Congress, and managing to, in a long-winded way, find the archivists and, you know, try to set things right. And they meet some very well-known writers along the way. A lot of favorites of mine come in here, so that was fun. But it's weird how she meets the writers. I couldn't quite understand how that worked, but it was still a fun story, and we are introduced to a new character called Milo, who works on this train that travels through Story, which is like a whole thing, and his uncle, who's a little bit creepy. But it was good. Again, it still has the thing where the kids kind of sneak off from what the grandparents want them to do, but sometimes it becomes acceptable. It has the appeal of, again, books about books. Whether it's nonfiction books or fictional books about books, people who can interact with books in ways that most readers who are really book lovers, who love stories, would love to be able to do. So it just takes your imagination a certain way, and really does show, even though of course this is fictional and fantasy, it does show kind of where one's imagination can take you. So I like that idea, and I did like the story. I am looking forward to the next one, although I am kind of wondering what they're going to do, what Anna James is going to do with this story. Like, how much further can it be stretched, and different concepts and types introduced before it gets a little bit fantastical. But yeah, it was a I wouldn't say cozy, but it was a nice, enjoyable adventure, and definitely worth it. And last but not least, this is not really in order of what I read, but this is a book that I could not get for weeks and weeks from my library, so I had to get it through their ebook system, which I don't like doing because I had to read it on my phone, which I can read it on a tablet, but I mostly read it on the phone, and then I got it like when I was two chapters away from finishing it. The book was finally available. The Railway Children by Nesbit was finally available in the flesh, as it were. And so then I could see the pictures, because you know what, the ebook on the phone did not have pictures, and I do not like that. And I really wanted pictures. I mean, come on, when you have middle grade books, you want pictures. That is like half the appeal of middle grade books. So, but I was still enjoying the story. I knew a little bit about it actually from reading the the last book in the Anna James series, which has the characters from the Railway Children appearing in the story. So I kind of got spoiled as to one little plot point from the Railway Children, but I didn't really care in this case. This is about three siblings, all of whom, well, two of them are girls and one of them is a boy, but all of them kind of have boyish names. So sometimes that confused me, but they live with their parents and have a nice little life, doing pretty well for themselves until the father basically leaves one day with some men, and there's a mystery, although you can pretty much figure out with common sense what happened to him. But they're suddenly in a straitened circumstance and they have to move away to a little house, not on the prairie, that is just different. They have to make do with their situation. So the siblings basically find their own adventures because they live near a railway, and they have ways of just entertaining themselves and getting to know people and helping people along the way in ways that they don't expect. So this kind of does good things for other people and ends up doing good for themselves. So I don't want to tell you too much because there's just so many different little adventures that they get into. Sometimes they get into like scrapes that are a little like, oh, cringy, but it's so much fun. It's kind of, I don't know if the word's endearing, but yeah, it is really, in a strange way, a kind of a cozy story that just you want to see these kids. And they're not perfect kids. They fight and they, tease each other and stuff, but they just manage to fall into good things in some way. Even when they get in trouble, things work out kind of well. And I like that positivity, I guess. A lot of coincidences, but I didn't mind it. Again, I can deal with coincidence. I did like their mother a lot. She put up with a lot of stuff, and she's also creative, lives by her pen to keep them going. And I always like that idea. So I am glad I read this. Finally, I had read at least one book by Edith. I think her first name is Edith Nesbit, which was Five Children in It, which was a very different story, a little more fantasy, but it was a very different kind of story, and I don't remember much about it because it's been many years. But I think she's a pretty good writer, and I'm glad I was introduced to her. I know there's a sort of a sequel type of movie coming out that takes place during World War II, the evacuees being children at that time. So I might have a look at that as well. That was my reading month. I hope you enjoyed. I did ramble quite a lot, but I hope you enjoyed anyway. Let me know if you have enjoyed any of these books, or if you want to read any of them, or what you did read and enjoy in the month of March. So that is all for now. This is Catherine. Here comes my teacup. At Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and bookville day. Goodbye.